Evening, everybody. Welcome to the Australian Theatre Panel. My name is Denise Varney, and I'm in Theatre Studies and the School of Culture and Communication at the University of Melbourne, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this session. The title of the session is Theatrical Tendencies, and we've got four playwrights who are going to talk about their work. Without further ado, I'm going to ask each of the playwrights to talk for 10 minutes or so, and then we should have time for questions at the end, which will be about 15 minutes. 15 minutes we'll have for questions. Okay, so thank you once again. Our first speaker is Lally Katz. Lally first started writing plays while a student in the School of Creative Arts at the University of Melbourne. And I remember well those early plays for their vivid creativity and impulsiveness. Stuck Pig Squealing is the name of her company, and its publics are local as well as international. Since graduating, Lally has quickly established herself as a major new playwright. Black Swan of Trespass, The Stedford, Lally Katz and The Terrible Mysteries of the Volcano. Lally's plays are noted for their wonderful titles. They bump up against each other in quick succession. Co-writer with Tom Wright of Criminology in 2008 and Goodbye Vaudeville Charlie Mudd, which premiered at Melbourne Malthouse Theatre in March 2009 and won the Louis Essen Prize for Drama. Apocalypse Bear trilogy premiered at the MTC as part of the Melbourne International Arts Festival. As you can see, Lally is unbelievably prolific. A Gollum story has just finished at the Malthouse, and she's rehearsing new plays, Neighbourhood Watch at the Belvoir Theatre and Return to Earth at the MTC. In 2010, she was in New York, attending rehearsals of Goodbye New York, Goodbye Heart, which was produced by the production company. So, Lally, could you talk to us about your work?
Yes.
About your writing.
Okay, well, I think I was thinking, because I asked Denise, because I forgot exactly what we were meant to be talking about, and she said it was about in terms of how we write for audiences, and so I was thinking about it, and when I first started writing, I was just writing for myself in a way, which I think is kind of good to do, because you could, if at times that I've tried to write for for someone else or for other people, I always find that I get outside the work. So it's always about kind of trying to find a place of truth that you're writing from, that you kind of believe and care about. But then I guess the problem is sometimes with those places of truth, it's sometimes other people don't necessarily care about them. And I guess one play that I did kind of early on was Lally Katz and the Terrible Mysteries of the Volcano, which was really for myself and also for the company that I was working with. But it was really sort of that play sort of made me realize that I wanted to start learning how to do work that I felt kind of connected with a broader audience, and so not that I want to be an enemy of that old work, but I guess that it sort of made me feel like I wanted to try and reach it made me think about how I could still write from a place inside myself and a place that was true to myself, but at the same time be, I guess, filling up bigger theatres and reaching more audiences. And so I guess a specific way that I've done that, well, there's been a few ways I've done that, hopefully this year. One way, a Gollum story, which was just at the Malthouse, was, I guess I had the Jewish community kind of in my mind when I was writing it. And it's a funny thing when you have a group of people in mind when you're writing something, because it's partly that you just don't want them to be angry, and it's partly that you are kind of trying to connect with them, I guess, in a way. So it's sort of a dangerous thing, because you kind of, if you don't want to start getting too polite. And sometimes when I'm writing for a certain audience, I'll find that my work does start to get a little, I guess my work is often quite, or for a long time it was quite surreal, and sort of, it kind of made sense in the way that a dream would make sense. And then I would hope that the way that dream emotionally made sense to me would emotionally make sense to an audience. And so, but I guess then when you sort of take on the story of like a golem, many of you might not know what it is. I didn't know what it was originally. I thought it was, when the Malthouse asked me if I wanted to do it, I thought it was that character from Lord of the Rings. And so it was kind of a big research experience for me as well. And I guess research is kind of a way of I guess learning the language of a greater audience, because you're sort of taking other people's work, papers and stuff and then trying to make it something dramatic in your own words. But I guess I can't remember where I was going with the golem story. It was so that was kind of, I was trying to write something for a people that I felt connected to, because I have Jewish heritage, but at the same time I didn't know much about them. So it was kind of learning a culture at the same time, and learning a religion at the same, and sort of the play, I guess writing the play reflected my kind of journey into that. And then and I guess another thing that I've become, when I was younger, I didn't really know how to write plots, and I was sort of a bit disdainful of plots, because I wrote so much from my subconscious, and I was a little bit afraid of my conscience, because I was quite secure in my subconscious. I was kind of always in dialogue with my dreams and kind of walking around, like reality was a really it was a kind of not a fixed place for me, like, and it was like my way of seeing the world. It changed what I assumed the world to be, and I guess my plays often reflected that. And then I guess as I started getting older, reality maybe started becoming a bit more fixed for me, and so I guess I wanted to kind of reflect that in my writing, and I wanted to invite a bigger audience into my work. And so I guess one way, I'll just tell a little thing. So I had this sort of realization once. I was working at the television show Rove for about 6 weeks. I only did a half day a week, and then they had to fire me. But they were really sweet to me. But I just couldn't quite get how to do it. And I would go in on my days off, and I would watch one gag over and over again on video, trying to learn how to write it. And I never worked out how to do it.
Sorry, Lally, were you there to write gags for the show?
I was there to write gags.
Okay.
I don't know why they hired me. This guy, the head writer, was I kind of knew him from the theatre world, and so he thought, we'll give her a try. But I hadn't watched television in like about 11 years, and all their jokes were about TV, and so I kept kind of giving them these jokes which were, and then a shark swims in, and they go, not so much. And but I learned two really important things, and one was I started trying to write what I thought they would think was funny, and the head writer took me aside and said, I brought in this one skit, and he said, do you think this is funny? And I said, no. And he said, well, if you don't think it's funny, no one's going to think it's funny. And then and that was kind of a good lesson. And then but when I was going in on my days off and just watching one gag over and over and over again, I realized that what they did was that they, like, say, Rove would it would be him talking, and he would sort of set up a situation where he would say, okay, I know this and you know this, to the audience, like about something in everyday life. And so what they would do is they'd get the audience on the same platform as them, and then once they were both on the same page, then they would jump. And because the audience knew where they were, they could jump with them. And then once you're in the air and the audience is with you, you can twist, you can land somewhere else, or you can land back where you started, but the audience has gone on the journey with you. And I thought, oh, okay, so it's not just, hey, watch me jump. You can have and it's much more interesting if you can invite the audience to jump with you. So that kind of really changed the way that I thought about writing. And I guess in a play that I'm rehearsing now in Sydney, it's called Neighbourhood Watch. It was originally called The Hope Dolphin Rides Tonight, but they talked me down. It's changed a lot, that play. But the reason I first started writing that play is I'd had a conversation with a really wonderful Australian actress, Robin Nevin, and we discussed my writing a play for her. And so I was looking for a part for her, and I wanted I didn't want it to just be something that came from my imagination. I realized that I wanted to start really focusing on character and plot. And so I met this Hungarian woman who lives across the street from me in Melbourne, and basically stole her life for Robin Nevin. And but it was a really good lesson, because it sort of taught me her stories are all kind of about World War II, Hungary, and each story that she tells is sort of like a Hollywood movie. And so listening to her stories really kind of taught me about greater structures and greater plot, like kind of things that, and then I guess then I sort of had to put it inside me. So I guess it's always finding your heart in a story and then putting that story into your heart and then working out a way to translate it to the audience. And
that's actually probably a really lovely point to stop at.
Thank you.
I think that's really a fascinating journey, because beginning with the very early work, which, as you say, was from dreams and it was from the subconscious, and you were so interested in plot and character, and gradually over the years, plot and character, finishing with your Hungarian neighbour, have become much more important in the work. It's also interesting. I saw a Gollum story last week, and I was really struck, knowing your early work, just what a beautifully woven narrative it was, and that was another kind of development. So that's great. Thank you. We might move on to our next speaker, who's Jenny Kemp, and here's another writer who works from the subconscious, and the relationship between the subconscious and the everyday is really prominent in Jenny's work. But I'll introduce Jenny. Jenny is a writer of Australian drama, and she has probably more than any other theatre artist in Australia represented the coexistence of the conscious and the unconscious in contemporary everyday life. Her interest is in female characters in particular, and the way they slip between interior monologue and realist dialogue, and between the symbolic and everyday situations. She's not only created challenging roles for female actors, but has also raised the consciousness of readers and spectators about the imaginative and psychic lives of women. Kemp is the author of 3 short and 8 full-length plays, 7 of which she has directed as major productions. 4 of her plays are published in hard copy and 2 online. And Kemp's first plays were staged at La Mama and the back theatre of the Pram Factory in 1979. Among her plays since those days is The White Hotel in 1983, which is an adaptation of D.M. Thomas's novel of the same name. Call of the Wild, 1999, published in 1999, first performed in 1989. Remember, first performed in 1993 at Gasworks in St Kilda. The Black Sequin Dress, which was a major production commissioned by the Adelaide Festival that toured nationally. That was 1996, and Still Angela in 2002. Kemp's new works that she's going to talk about today are Kitten, a bipolar soap opera, which was first performed in 2008, and Madeline, A Shadow in the House of Love, from 2010. These form the On the Edge series. Thank you. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you. Well, after that introduction, I won't introduce myself. So I'll just start to talk my way into for you about the On the Edge project, which is this last lap with the 2 shows, Kitten and Madeline. And I'm going to go back to say that when I was growing up, and I haven't actually publicly said this particularly before, but I thought maybe I would, that I grew up with 3 sisters, and at about the age of 12, I was confronted with the fact that we weren't all proceeding on the same track, that reality was not the same for each of us. And to a certain extent, like this is always true in families, but in my case, or in our family's case, it involved mental illness, and so the difference is really heightened. it's a little bit like if there's a giant radio that's reality, that we're tuning into a particular wavelength, like say we're all on ABC AM, and we can't actually hear what's going on FM. So when you listen to one, you can't hear the other. And so it occurred to me that it was a little bit like that. And a really serious concern for me has always been both to understand and accept that someone who's sitting at the same table as me can be experiencing such an entirely different reality, and that their reality is as valid and real to them as mine is to me. And this is something which was quite profound to come across at the age of 12, travelling into one's teen years. It was my older sister who had the mental illness. And with Black Sequin Productions, this On the Edge project was one where I decided to write more directly into these concerns. And previously my work has been about the interface between the interior world or the unconscious world and the conscious world, and I think my interrogation positioned itself there probably because of this influence in my life. Possibly also that my father was an abstract expressionist painter, visual artist, and I was looking at these abstract paintings the whole time, so they were expressing something from a world that couldn't be actually seen. So they were pointing towards an interior world, another reality. Kitten was about a woman with bipolar, and Madeline about a woman who's got schizophrenia. That was for Arts House in 2010. So I wanted, with these works, to open up the interior worlds of these women, and also to look at their experience as seen or experienced by others. So to look at that disjunction or interface between those interiors and exteriors. And I wanted, with the work, and I'm still in this project, so I still want to both recognise the extreme difficulty of living with mental illness and also to validate that experience. To recognise that people with mental illness are also engaged in the process as we, the so-called functional people, are of ordering their world, of doing their best to survive successfully and make sense of the world. I'll just say a bit more about what I mean by ordering. I really mean working, that we are all engaged in working. And by that I mean making things happen or pulling things together to cause change, like working against entropy or the natural tendency, as in thermodynamics, for order to break down, become disordered or random when not worked on. Like quite often our work or our lives are about trying to get things organised, and if we don't, they'll sort of fall apart. And so that's what I was looking at, that these people, like we are all, even the ill, are attempting to order their worlds. Two problems came up for these women and for me as the writer about these women, was that their experience of the world was so fragmented that the level and scale of the task that was presenting as their work to be done was overwhelming and impossible to achieve. So that was one. The second one, that the existing structures within our social world for working on such large-scale tasks were not accessible or able to be used in a coherent way by these women. So they had the extra difficulty also of working in isolation. And the third thing, that their work may appear without purpose or even invisible to others. So they were the things that also as a writer, in finding a form and a language, that I was confronting. Nearly finished. How am I going time-wise? Yeah? Just to talk a little about the writing process itself and the finding of a form for both Kitten and Madeline. It was quite interesting because it required that I let go certain known modes of working and controls or constraints, particularly in relation to the delusional aspects of these realities. While writing, I worked on moving towards areas of expression that engaged parts of my mind that I feel less control over, that I might normally feel were illogical or irrational, and that were sometimes unfamiliar. Like, I'm talking about bypassing the judge, really. I tried to keep writing in this direction until an alternative form of logic started to become apparent. And that meant I had to depend on a kind of intuitive patterning and trust that this would lead to an alternative and somehow another sort of coherent reality, even if it were pieced together from a fragmented and apparently naive or unrealistic relationship with the world. It was confronting doing that because what emerged in myself as a writer was the very judgment that surfaces in relation to the mentally ill, the tendency to regard whatever they are doing as mad or incoherent, therefore something to be dismissed. So I'm writing into this area with that judgment coming at me. I wanted to find organising principles that might emerge rather than already be known, that would make sense of the way these women were behaving and bring me and the audience closer to understanding what was happening. In both of the plays, mental illness won and the individuals were seen to fail, that is, fail to successfully order their chaotic worlds without help from outside. The project is not to romanticise mental illness, but to offer the audience the possibility to become more familiar with it and to realise not just the differences but the similarities we share. So to make the world in a way less invisible, less strange. I was actually going to show some video from that for 5 minutes. I've got videos of my work. Because there are teachers here, I also wanted to mention that as a part of educating art films in Australia, positioned here, make videos of Australian work. I've got some pamphlets here. This isn't me trying to sell my work or anything. It's really that I felt it was worth mentioning that as theatre makers, one way for the work to go on living is the kind of thing that Denise does, which is write about the work, but also to make a document so that it's a teaching tool. And Art Films is doing terrific work on that. But we couldn't get the video to read, so sorry about that. Okay.
Thank you, Jenny. I think we had a really superb insight into your work, and the video would have helped that. But I think it's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. we'll move on to our third speaker, who's Raimondo Cortese. Playwright Raimondo and his brother Adriano founded Ranters Theatre in Melbourne in 1994, and it's still running as a touring company, touring mainly to Europe every 2 years.
No, twice a year.
Twice a year. I knew there was still two there somewhere. Raimondo's plays are urban stories of youth, everyday life and place, and increasingly have a pared-back simplicity that places the focus on conversation. His writing has recently been referred to as a slow dramaturgy, where really what is happening on stage is the unfolding of a conversation, and the amount of action is really reducing, and the amount of kind of scenic action is also reducing. His first play, Features of Brown Youth, was published in Melbourne Stories 3 Plays in 1997. This was followed by Roulette in 2000 and Sydney, the famous St Kilda Tales in 2001. Highly acclaimed Holiday featured two men exploring conversation as a medium of self-knowledge. Intimacy, which premiered at the 2010 Melbourne International Festival, features a man going out on a Friday night while people are shopping and engaging strangers in conversations, and the strangers lead to the strange conversations with strangers lead to intimacies, and then they move on, the night passes. His most recent play, The Dream Life of Butterflies, in 2011, is an exquisite one-act play about two sisters. Again, it's comprised of dialogue that begins with the everyday and gradually becomes more suggestive and reflective. Cortese also writes fiction, including The Indestructible Corpse, published by Text Publishing. So, over to you, Raimondo.
Thank you. Me and my brother founded Ranters, and actually we founded another company in 92. We changed our name in 94. I'll just read you a little kind of like it's a mission statement, really kind of encapsulates what Ranters are about. Most of my plays, I've written probably over about 30 different types of theatrical texts, and most of them have been with Ranters, but these days I actually kind of write pretty much for anybody if I can get work. But anyway, Ranters Theatre is a performance ensemble creating original work about people, relationships, emotion and inexplicable complexities of human behaviour. Our aim is to strip back the habitual codes that burden performance in order to reveal the personal idiosyncrasies and private mythologies that lie at the heart of human identity. We're inspired by the smallest elements of life around us, by the ordinary aspects of day-to-day living. We seek to reveal the strange and personal details that lie beneath accepted social convention. We revel in the complexity of these details. We believe in the audience's capacity to understand this complexity. We aim to foster a new dialogue with the audience that works on a subtle, unconscious level. We believe in chance and the random nature of things. We don't believe in the grand gesture or the ultimate act. We believe in life as a fluid structure that finds its own meaning. The reception of the theatrical event cannot be separated from what is performed. The theatrical event is a live exchange between people, and this exchange is never quantifiable or easily defined. Theatre can be defined in a very narrow way, i.e. as a live performance within a theatre venue, or broadly to the extent that it includes the entire scope of human activity, including even the observation of the natural or molecular world. Theatre can be a state of being. It is capable of synthesising any art form, moulding itself to radically new environments, altering form and content in a way that obliterates all previously recognised theatrical signifiers and still call itself theatre. It is this extraordinary flexibility that helps it endure. This flexibility is given its full range of expression because theatre cannot be separated from the way we live. Theatre is an exchange that is live. Theatre is actual and exists between people. That's the end of that, our little mission statement. But essentially, I like the others. I work very much from the unconscious. I don't ever sit in front of the computer and have a story that I really want to tell. I kind of do have a sense sometimes of the people I want to write about, or they're a kind of a sense really of. I don't actually use the word character when I write. I kind of prefer the word persona, which is kind of what actually French and Italians use, and in Spain, I think mainland Europe, and I prefer that word because it doesn't suggest that it suggests that in fact what you see is only a semblance of who that person actually is. I think one of the problems when writing is that you can have a very kind of narrow frame, or you have a kind of often a narrow understanding of what people are capable of, and I think part of that reason is that when you sit in front of a computer, when you start writing, you start becoming overly conscious of what it is you're trying to achieve. So often when writing, I try to let that go, and certainly when working with the company, I have to kind of give over to what it is that they do, what the actors want, what my brother as the director wants, and so I actually can't sort of deliver a kind of finished work. It's very much these days created with the ensemble. Having said that, I have written most of my works in isolation. I pretty much kind of write all different types of theatre. It depends on kind of often who I'm writing for. So, for example, I'm writing something like Dream Life of Butterflies. I was very aware that while I wanted to push the envelope in a certain way, I was also aware that I was writing for, the Lawler Theatre. I was writing for a main stage theatre that has a very particular type of audience, which is going to be different perhaps to the Malthouse Theatre. And while I'm aware that, audiences travel to and from different venues, I do think that theatres and venues there are different types of audiences that gravitate towards them, and so Arts House is very different to, I think, the Malthouse Theatre, and Malthouse Theatre is very different to the Melbourne Theatre Company. So whenever I'm working with someone, even within Sydney, Belvoir Street Theatre, I'm doing a collaboration with them at the moment, with Urban Theatre Projects. No matter who I'm writing with, I always sort of have an eye on the kind of audience that might come along. So, for example, Ranters' work is now mainly presenting in European style kind of alternative venues and festivals. We've also been to Canada and New York, but essentially it's in Europe, and we're very aware of what kind of work that market is interested in presenting. Now, that's not to say that we compromise our work or mould it in any particular way, but we're very aware there's no point kind of, for example, presenting something like Dream Life of Butterflies in a context like, the Chapter Art Centre in Wales, or Campo in Belgium, or Entresennen in Denmark, these kinds of venues. They're presenting kind of more alternative festival type work, which is a move away from the kind of well-made play or the 3-act structure or even the 1-act structure. So it's a very different types of work that they're presenting. So Ranters, when I'm working for Ranters, it's kind of quite a different, kettle of fish, basically. But the work that I've done over the years has changed, and I think the important thing is to, whenever you can sit down and do something, you always try to challenge yourself. You try to throw away what has worked in some sense. Our original works, the Ranters, our first kind of works really had none of my work has really had much of a plot. We really didn't have, what was it called? Raft of the Medusa was our first production, 1992, and that was essentially a bunch of actors building a structure in a space. I think we had about 4 people came along to see it, but it was a lot of fun. But essentially, actually, that was the basis of all our work, in the sense of it is about people doing things, or doing things to each other. The focus is not on the narrative content in my writing. I think that is generally different. Well, I think most theatre particularly in the English-speaking world is on the narrative content. In other words, the story that's being told between people. That really isn't the focus in my work at all. It's very much on the nuance. It's very much on the kind of unconscious behaviour that gets revealed through the dialogue. In other words, the dialogue's action kind of driven, but it's not really about the content at all. It's really about the kind of the minutiae of what happens between the people when they're talking to each other. In that sense, it's quite small. It's quite slow and it's quite small, and I kind of like that kind of stuff.
We might have to wrap it. Have you got a final sentence?
No, that'll do.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. because we want to save some time for your questions at the end. The finale is Hannie Rayson. Hannie is an award-winning Melbourne-based playwright whose plays include Hotel Sorrento from 1990, which won a Green Room Award for Best Play and was made into a feature film. Both the play and the film are frequently set for secondary and tertiary courses, along with her later works Inheritance and Two Brothers. Falling from Grace followed in 1994, Scenes from a Separation, co-written with Andrew Bovell in 1996, and the multi-award winning Life After George premiered at the Melbourne Arts Centre on the 1st of January 2000, a memorable day. This was a huge success, capturing the zeitgeist about the fate of liberal arts in a user-pays tertiary education sector. Notably, it was the first Australian play to be nominated for the Miles Franklin Award, and that's an enormous achievement. More recently, Hannie has turned to large-scale historical drama, the aforementioned Inheritance, 2003, to politics with Two Brothers in 2005 that upset Andrew Bolt no end, and most recently The Swimming Club, 2010. So, Hannie, would you like to talk about your work for us?
Yes, thank you, Denise. I know that a lot of you are here for the as part of the conference about teaching Australian literature in schools and in universities, and I thought I'd just start by making or giving courage, I think, to that task with a little anecdote of my own experience of going to university in the 70s and at high school as well, that I actually didn't ever study any Australian literature. And so as a result, I kind of came into my adulthood thinking that the profound aspects of the human condition happened offshore. That in fact nothing particularly profound could happen in an Australian lounge room. That it only occurred while people were hovering around the samovar, or it only happened in a French jail in a Genet play, or sort of in Norway. Anywhere,
cold climate.
Anywhere cold climate and indoors. But it wouldn't happen around an Australian barbecue. So when I started reading from that stable of McPhee Gribble with their writers, when I started to go to, and particularly Helen Garner, when I started to go to the theatre and see the work of David Williamson and Jack Hibbard, John Romerell and Alex Buzo, those people were a decade older than me or more. It was a revelation. It was epiphanous to me. It was as though the experiences of my life could be valid material for the making of art. And that everything that I was experiencing, I was actually able to read about and see, and it really did have a very profound effect on me, because I began to see, it was kind of empowering. I hate this kind of language of psychobabble, but that's what it was, and it was empowering because I saw that the culture was not immutable, that in fact the culture was changing and I could contribute to that change. So, for example, I've been in Paris working with some French playwrights, and the weight of tradition there is quite significant. It weighs on their shoulders. They don't have the kind of delicious, serendipitous, maverick quality that I see in Australian theatre, because there's a lot of stuff weighing on them from the past. Anyway, I just feel like it's a travesty to think that young people are growing up and coming through school and going to university and actually not having that opportunity, or the opportunities are being limited. As for my own work, I don't work from the unconscious. I sort of wish I did. I suppose I do, but I wish I did. I'm the kind of person that when I dream, and if I've lost a job, I will dream that that there is a wolf at the door. So I feel that my unconscious is very literal. I'm interested. I see the theatre as a very, well, my kind of theatre, the theatre that I make anyway, and this is, I have this feeling that there's so much discussion amongst theatre makers actually about as if there is only one route forward, and my view about the theatre is let 1,000 flowers bloom. I'm thrilled by the diversity of theatre and want to see more of it. So I'm just talking about the kind of theatre that I make, and I'm sort of interested in its public nature. I feel like it is a very public forum, and I'm very conscious of an audience. It's different than writing a novel where you have a contract, a very private and very intimate contract with a reader, and it occurs when somebody's in bed or alone in a lovely comfortable chair. I'm aware that there could be 900 people in the room at any one time, and so I'm conscious of this public nature of it. But that suits me because I'm interested in theatre that kind of works on a number of levels, and I am interested in engaging with the national conversation. So I'm interested in big themes that possibly chronicle where we are at any time in our history. That's the objective. And so I'm always after the kind of idea, the site of contradiction, the idea that kind of could reflect a moment of change. I'm currently, and when I talk about issues of the day, it's not necessarily stuff that happens. And politics is not so much that something happens in Canberra. I'm finding the current crop of politicians quite dull, and that's not it. What I mean. I'm talking about politics that is about the way we live and about how power is exercised, and that really interests me and always has. On a macro level, I'm interested, but I'm also interested on a family level. And so what I want the work to do, what I'm always striving for, is to create intimate familial portraits, recognisable portraits that also sit against a kind of backdrop of social change. So whether that's historical or contemporary, I'm not fussed, but I'm always on the lookout for really what's on people's minds, what they think are the key issues of the moment, and what they tell us about who we are and where we might be heading. So my current work is actually about climate change, and it's a topic which is sort of probably your eyes are glazing over, and it's quite hard to imagine it in terms of the drama. But my interest at the moment is about the connection between science and the marketplace, and the point in which environmentalism became or started to collide with marketplace values, and I'm sort of starting out, so it's quite hard to talk about new work when you're just reading madly and thinking madly. But always when I'm doing this stuff, I'm conscious of that I am interested in the three things: theme, character and plot. I do want to tell a narrative. I love story. I'm in love with story. I'm a huge reader, and I strive to make a perfect story. It is a thing that I would love to do, and one that works on stage. So I'm all the time building. I'm building characters, people who are not voice pieces for political ideas. I'm not interested in that at all. But I'm interested in the sort of complexity of people, how they hold values that are different to mine. And so, for example, at the moment I'm working with a mining executive in my head. I'm not working with one. I'm an imaginary one. And I'm asking all those questions like, can a mining executive be an environmentalist? Which is the same as, can an army general be a humanitarian? Of course he can, or she can, of course. But how do those values sit? Are they compartmentalised things where you think, yes, you can be a very good person and give money for people in the third world, and yet you're also a kind of complete bastard to your family at home? Does it sit like that, where you're not conscious of your contradictions? Or do people just compartmentalise their life? They think, I go to work, I'm in mining, and then on my weekends, on my day off, I try and save the planet. How does that stuff sit together? So that's the kind of fascinations that I have. But how to actually create drama out of the issues of the day enough that I certainly won't be advertising this as a climate change play. But it's certainly just to give you an idea about the kind of ways in which I am kind of captured by the zeitgeist and energised by it, and want the theatre to, take its place as contributing to that conversation.
Thank you, Hannie. Thanks very much. We have two people with microphones now, and we have some time for questions or discussion amongst the panellists, but particularly from you, the audience. If you'd like to raise your hand, you'll be given a microphone.
This is for Hannie. I've just come from the conference that you mentioned this was part of, and during the afternoon we heard from an educationalist who was talking about what texts are on VCE, and you may or may not know. Well, the question for you is, do you know that several of your texts have been set for VCE? But what we learned from the speaker was that she gets feedback from the examiners, so she knows which texts are most chosen to write about, which are the most popular tests, in other words, which of course is what texts the teachers choose and what of those texts the students choose to write about in their exams. And on the other end of the scale, there were the texts that were least written about, and I think yours featured in the least written about, but the object was to pick out how many Australian texts appeared, and the saving grace was, I don't think your texts were the least written about, by the way. I think they were.
Thank you for sharing that with everybody, though.
The saving grace was that the ones that wrote about the text, the Australian text on the least written about, were the best essays. So I concluded that it's the best writers who are least written about in exams that produce the best result.
Thanks very much for that observation. Thank you.
A little bit
nice at the end.
Well, I'm always really, some writers are anxious about their work being on school syllabi, but I'm always thrilled because I actually remember that being a time of real engagement. Like the most intense engagement probably that you're going to have in your life is when you're writing about stuff or thinking about stuff in VCE. I mean, that's a bit of a sad indictment, isn't it? But I mean, then you go to work and so you don't really engage with text necessarily on that level. So I'm always really happy that they're programmed, and I mean, it doesn't reflect in my bank account, I have to tell you. I'd love to say that I've made a huge amount of money with sales from the VCE. I had hoped that would be the case, but it's not really.
I think the other aspect of VCE too that we find with first year students is the amount of time they spend on a text as well. It's not just that they have the time at year 12, but they might spend 4 to 6 weeks on a text, on a single text, so they really get to explore it.
Hi, it's fantastic to see playwrights of such different approaches and styles. My question is about style. A number of the panellists have mentioned about different theatre companies and playing for different audiences, different theatre companies. You know, the MTC has a certain style or a certain preference. The Malt House has a certain style, a certain artistic direction and preference. As a writer, obviously, that has an impact on you in terms of where your plays can be produced, in terms of who you're writing for. And my question is, sorry, just generally to all of you, about to what extent do you feel that style, which comes in and out of fashion and changes with time, how that affects your writing for a public whose tastes, obviously, as culture changes, also changes. And obviously you have your own preferences in terms of your own style and how you want to communicate ideas. So is there a pressure at all from, you know, I guess, culture audiences and theatre companies and the artistic directors of theatre companies to tell stories in a certain style?
Who'd like to take that one first?
I wouldn't mind saying something about what that felt like just a little while back, when writing pieces that didn't have an obvious style or genre apparent in the form of the writing, and some pieces do and some don't, like you start reading and you know what genre it is. In some of my early work, the work written as it was on the page, it wasn't easy for a company or a festival to read that and actually believe it was going to turn into anything. And so that was actually caused a bit of a problem in terms of getting grants or making the work available for festivals and that sort of thing. So that's just one little detail. And then, you know, in relation to the written text and the form, that, I mean, as a writer-director, it's like, and I think in a way you and you know, I shouldn't speak for you, but in terms of you and Adriano, the finding of the form for the writing is a really sort of key part, because a lot of contemporary texts now, in a way, the writing, when you look at the writing, you don't quite know what the form's going to be. And that's a little bit scary, and the form has to be found. And so there's quite a big risk element. There's a sort of double risk element, because one's to do with the written text and the other's to do with whether a form can even be found, or what that form might be, and whether an audience can recognise it. So I think that there's quite a lot going on in the kind of more contemporary sort of dissolution of the known genres in some of them, you know, through Europe and well, everywhere in the world, sort of post TV, in a way, that theatre is well, there's a lot of people trying to find new form, and I think it is really risky. I don't know, that's just a comment.
Thanks,
to kick it along.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah, I think it's really about developing and creating an audience for your work. So there's no doubt. I mean, you know, Playbox is a very different place to the Malt House, and that was largely a cultural shift came about with a new artistic director, a new producing team. Essentially, they've started making very different work there. So there's no doubt that, you know, the artistic team that runs the venues have tastes and preferences, and that affects.
If I might just interrupt there, Playbox Theatre, which opened in 1990 at the Malt House Centre, had a policy of only performing new Australian plays, and that was a policy that lasted until 2003, I think, when Michael Cantor and the new... Yeah, so for 15 years, Playbox Theatre was a place where new Australian plays were produced, and then there was a shift in 2003. But, yeah, sorry to interrupt, I just thought I'd fill that in.
Yeah, so now my position has always been, you know, you just work with, you know, people gravitate towards your work for whatever reason, and you go out there and you make it. I do think that, you know, the best way is to build and create an audience for your work, and and the interesting thing is that, we have similar conversations. I mean, we would tour a work like Holiday, we put it on an arts house, and we went to Malthouse, and we took it overseas. It's been performed in lots and lots of places, and what's interesting is you have very similar conversations with people from all different kinds of backgrounds, English speaking and not, who find something that interests them in that kind of work. And it's the same. For me. What's interesting in Australia is there's a much bigger emphasis on building audiences because there's a higher reliance on box office. Pardon me, box office. In Europe, they're much more subsidised, and they actually don't care about box office all that much. They will soon because they're going to lose a lot of their money because they're all in debt and they're all going to pull back how much money they spend, and they're all fucked up basically. Europe. But anyway, they're running on borrowed time, and the same with the cultural. There's a lot of arrogance around this, and I think what's great in Australia is the theatres are very good at building audiences. So, for example, a company like ours, and a lot of this work here. Now, in the context of, say, something like Forced Entertainment would go on in London probably 2 to 3 performances. Elevator repair service, they might do something 2 or 3 4 performances. Whereas alternative companies here produced in season. So you might get 3,500 people coming to see your show. That's a lot more than what alternative companies will ever garner in those festival venues or small venues in Europe, because they're not pushing it out there. So in Australia, we're very kind of down on ourselves about how we sort of think we've got to dumb down things. I actually think we're actually very good at generating and building audiences for things. It's just you've got to find the right place for it. And I actually think nowadays there's a lot more possibilities, a lot more alternatives for people than there were certainly back. In the 90s, I was sort of despairing about the opportunities. Now it's quite a rich environment, particularly in Melbourne.
It reminds me of Hannie's comment about the situation in Australian theatre is one of many flowers. Is that what you said? Different style, different form, and which gives many opportunities. I think we've got time for one short question and one short response. Thank you.
I'll try and make it short. Sorry. This is probably directed particularly at Hannie because you raised the issue of topical work. And I know that purely from a pragmatic perspective, writing something, researching something takes a long period of time. How do you negotiate keeping it fresh and being seen as leading the conversation rather than following it when conversation happens and is generated and changes so quickly?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. That really affects film much more than it does the theatre, I think. And because it takes so long for a film to be made. But in the theatre, there is a kind of more rapid turnover. You'd be surprised how long it takes for ideas to kick around. I feel like with Life After George, for example, and which was about what Denise said about the universities, that it even feels more relevant now, with the Melbourne model, even more as a sort of a statement about what's happening in universities. So the actual direct answer to that, though, is that if things move out of date, you just fix them. You're in rehearsal and you change them.
In performance, run in and say...
Yeah. I've been sort of I'm the kind of playwright who, when people, I'm in the wing saying, line 17, change that, don't do that anymore. So we can be very fluid about that sort of stuff.
I think that's a great note to finish on, the idea of if it's out of date, fix it. And you can do it during the performance, cut that line. And there can be quite a rapid response and also a very lively engagement between the playwright and the stage, which is something we haven't spoken about directly here, but it's been mentioned by each of the playwrights, that it's not just sitting in a room writing a play, it's actually being out there and having a company and putting the work on and seeing it and contributing to it. But unfortunately we're out of time, so I would like to thank Jenny Kemp,
Thank you.
Hannie Rayson, Lally Katz, Raimondo Cortese, and thank you to the audience. Thank you.